Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex Sword. We have a ton to talk about on the college football side of things. We got Slade Bolden, former Alabama wide receiver, national champion, joining us to break down the SEC championship. Tomorrow, we got DJ Shockley to break down the SEC championship and the Falcons matchup with the Jets. Also, talk about that Saints game. But right now, we got to discuss the big topic of this evening, and that is yesterday's college football playoff rankings. We talked a lot about how this might sort out and all the chaos and the scenarios. And these came out, and I for most of the time, I'm usually not surprised by these. I was pretty shocked. I mean, they kept all the undefeated teams up there at the top. They didn't, Florida State's basically it looks like they're a win and you're in. But the bone that I have to pick, and it's one that if you follow me on Twitter at Sports Talk ATL, I made very clear I have no idea why Oregon is getting the benefit of the doubt in these situations. Their resume is one of the worst in the country, easily the worst of the country of any team with one loss. It's not even close. They have one win over a ranked opponent. It's Oregon State. They lost to the only other ranked opponent team. That's Washington. And I frankly would tell you Washington isn't that good of a team. They might be ranked 3, but they're not the third best team in the country. I don't even know if they're a top 10 team in this country. I have a futures ticket on those guys. I want them to win the national championship. I just know they're not because I know they're not that good. But listen, Texas has beaten Alabama in Alabama. They have one close loss to Oklahoma. They've ran through the rest of their schedule and they have a common opponent with Oregon, 57-7 and 38-30, and they needed a pick 6 for that 38-30, by the way. And Alabama, I mean, they beat Ole Miss, they beat LSU, they beat Tennessee, they beat 4 or 5 ranked teams, whatever. I don't. None of this makes sense to me. Even Ohio State, like they haven't looked good, but they still have a win over Penn State and Notre Dame. Those are better wins than anything Oregon showed. I'm sorry, Oregon. This fraudulent thing. They're basically telling me schedule the easiest schedule, go beat everyone by 50, and you will get a spot in the college football playoff. Why would I schedule anything? Why would I schedule a hard game anymore? Why would I do that?
If you want a real answer, I guess money. I mean, there's certainly money in it. That Alabama-Texas game brought in a ton of dough. I know that was a rhetorical question, but that's why you schedule them. No, but I get your point. Alabama's kind of not being rewarded for making that game with Texas. And listen, they play the game for a reason, and I agree that you cannot ignore it. Oregon lost their one true test. I would say in hindsight, now we look back at it, their one true test was Washington, but in the moment, there was a couple more tests. Utah at the time was a better team than they are right now, and Oregon absolutely handled them. So I do think you can't really ignore that. The Colorado win, I will absolutely not hold in the same light as Utah because I think that Colorado was always a sham, and Utah's defense is legit. I just think, my biggest thing is with Ohio State. I get all your points with Oregon. And I'm Oregon. I've been in Oregon's corner this entire year. I love Dan Lanning. I think Bo Nix has been a revelation up there in Eugene. I do want to say he does not deserve the Heisman. Jaden Daniels absolutely deserves a Heisman, but he absolutely deserves to be recognized for this season because it was very good. They're one of the most well-rounded teams in the country. I think defensively, offensively, there is very few teams that can compete with them on the field. And I think, they're one of the 4 best teams in the country. Unfortunately, like I said, they play the game for a reason. They lost to Washington. They'll have a chance Friday night to kind of rectify that loss, which I think you, me, and the rest of the country believes they're going to steamroll Washington and eventually get into that college football playoff. You know what I have a big problem with? My problem is with Ohio State. I don't know how, the committee looked at Oregon and, saw all the things you just said about resume and things like that. Granted, their loss was to the number 3 team. What is Washington? The number 3 team in the country, and Ohio State was to the number 2 team in the country. I just don't know how you watched Oregon's games and Ohio State's games and then Alabama and Texas's games and Ohio State's game, and then ranked Ohio State ahead of Texas and Alabama. I have no idea how you did that. At no point in time did I ever look at an Ohio State game and said, oh, wow, they look like one of the 4 best teams in the country. At no point in time did I ever think that. I still think today that they're not they shouldn't be ahead of Texas and Alabama. And if you want to talk about, good losses versus bad losses and wins and whatnot, I don't think the Notre Dame win was all that. And I know that Notre Dame went out and absolutely smacked a Pac-12 team, but I have no idea how we're going to hold a close loss to Michigan, who struggled in multiple games this year. Against or for Ohio State. I think Ohio State should not be where they're at. And, you could have an argument about Oregon and an argument in Alabama. Alabama struggled with Auburn. I just don't know where the rhyme or reason is in any of this. And I think that's the biggest problem with you, me, and everybody in the country is we all have a bone to pick. We all have a certain, problem with it. Most of them lie with Oregon, but where is the rhyme or reason with all the one-loss teams? Because it's not all resume. It's not all how they look. So what is it? And I know you're not going to give me an answer, but
I'm going to get – I can't give you an answer, but I can tell you exactly – I can give you exactly even more to your point, not just the one losses. Florida – so obviously they hold Oregon in this high regard because – they are flashy wins against bad teams, and it really tickles their peach. I do not understand it, but it really tickles this committee's peach, and there's no doubt about that. But if that's the case, right, they're ignoring resumes for the one-loss teams, right, because Oregon has the worst of them. There's no question about it. They're ignoring resumes. Then why aren't we ignoring the resume, or then why aren't we looking at Florida State and basing it off that? Because Florida State now doesn't have a quarterback. So if we're basing it off looks, Florida State hasn't looked that great since early parts of the years. Now they don't have a quarterback. But apparently the resume matters because they have no losses. So none of it makes any sense. There is nothing here that makes any sense. Florida State, if you're looking at the best 4 teams in the country, I think we can all agree they're not one of the best 4 teams in the country right now. And they're just saying, it matters that they're undefeated, so they're going to get in. Well, if we're just, it just doesn't make any sense. There is, like you said, there is no rhyme or reason. I don't think Oregon's, I don't know. I'm just so perplexed. And to be honest, if Alabama wins this, they're now 8. Are they getting in? That's a real question now. They have all of a sudden, they have dumbed down Alabama. Somehow Alabama, who's gotten the benefit of the doubt in this committee for year after year after year, has been dumbed down to the 8th best team in the country after losing 1 game in week 2 against a top 10 opponent.
So we want to, and I agree with all these points. I think nobody can make an argument. I still think the Pac-12 is the second best team or conference in the country behind the SEC. And I think what's important in all of this is, I guess Oregon, they lost a close one to Washington. At the time, Utah was top 15. They dog walked them. At the time, Oregon State was 16. They dog walked them. They kind of answered every bell. But if we want to talk about the actual, again, I'm going back to Ohio State because the Big Ten is absolutely trash. And I could say the same thing for Texas in the Big 12. If Texas had not played Alabama and that win, I would feel much stronger about that. But I still think that, that Texas win over Bama isn't as impressive as it would be today because this Bama team is a much different football team. And, again, they play the game for a reason, so I can't necessarily hold my hat on that. But I think that Oregon's, conference wins are more impressive than Ohio State's, even out of conference against Notre Dame, and more so against Texas. I mean, listen, you think that Oregon State is just a bad football team?
Yes, it's exactly what I think.
Well, you said Penn State's a bad football team too. So what,
Penn State dog walks Oregon State.
Okay, but my point is how Oregon beat Oregon State. Ohio State barely beat Penn State.
I mean, they won by 2 touchdowns.
I think if you watch that game, that was not a 2-score game. I think that,
it was a Big Ten. It was a Big Ten 40.
It was a big. Okay.
I mean,
I just think all these conferences stink.
It's like I don't even really want to knock Oregon because I do think they are a good team, and I do like Dan Lanning, but the resume thing doesn't make any sense to me, and I do think the rest of the Pac-12 is not doing them any favors because I do think the rest of the Pac-12 is bad. Like USC didn't do them any favors. They got beat by 30 by Notre Dame. They lost 5 games. Colorado was terrible. Utah turned out to be pretty bad. Oregon State is a 4-loss team. Like, I'm sorry, but when you only have 1 win over a top 20 team and it's the 20th ranked team with 4 losses.
Outside of Penn State, Ohio State was playing JUCO teams. They played
I can make
nobody.
an argument that's every team in the Pac-12.
That's every team in the Big Ten outside of, and it's every team in the Big 12 as well. They all stink, and that's why Alabama they're getting shafted. Alabama's getting shafted because the SEC is once again the best conference in football, and it's not particularly close.
I gotta say something because yes, I commented on a tweet about it yesterday. I think John does sports or something like that. He's a big Georgia fan. I couldn't believe an SEC home, like a guy from the SEC said something as ridiculous that the Pac-12 is better than the SEC. I'm sorry, buddy. You need to change your name to John Doesn't Know Sports because I like that. That is one of the most ridiculous things I have ever. That's the just stop tweeting. Let's ring it in. Just stop tweeting moment of the week.
I had commented on it as well, and I'm open to any answers, any debate. Name a single conference, any conference, where the fourth best team in that conference can beat LSU on a neutral site field. I posed that question to him, and what he brought up is LSU's sorry defense, which is absolutely true, that they, in terms of points per game to Power 5 opponents, they would be, I think he said, the 7th or 6th in the Pac-12. But guess what? LSU is the best offense in the country, and it's not particularly close in terms of
scoring 60, buddy. They're scoring 60.
So name a single team. Name the fourth best team in the Big 12, Pac-12, or Big 10 that is beating LSU on a neutral site field. In fact, I could guarantee you LSU would be closer to 10-point favorites than a toss-up.
And also, LSU's the 5th highest ranked team in the SEC. They're the 5th highest. They're not even the 4th. You got Missouri, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Georgia. And like, look what Kentucky just did to Louisville. That's like the 10th best team. And I'm telling you, put Texas A&M and Tennessee against the 7th and 8th best teams of other conferences. The depth from top to bottom, it is so. Mississippi State beat Arizona. What are you talking about, dude? I don't care that they changed quarterbacks. Mississippi State, that terrible program, went in and beat the number 14 team in the country from the Pac-12. Coming up after the break, Slade Bolden's going to join us. We're going to get into the SEC championship.